Thank you
so much. Thank you so much.
How we do it right here?
This is it. Well, you can sit on that side if you don't want to be close.
But the mic has to remain in the stand, or
you can take the mic out.
no, I'm good.
How do you? What you can? You can.
I just wanted to make sure it was awkward right at the beginning. Like we all made it through that pre-speech, which was very interesting.
Thank you.
And
he owns the place.
no, I get that,
he pays the rent.
And I appreciate his freedom.
Speaking of awkward,
As the mic goes off, yeah.
Somebody, you tweeted today that
Yeah.
somebody wrote their thesis about what the fuck?
Yes, a guy came up to me after the show last night and said, I don't know, I just want you to have this. It's my graduate thesis. And I wrote it on WTF, and I literally could not even get through the title of the paper. I didn't know what the fuck it was about.
What was the title?
I have no idea. It was so abstract. It used words like it's in that language. I don't know if it was a philosophy paper or some sort of postmodern. And I'm a pretty bright guy, but I could not get through 2 pages of that fucking paper. And it's about me. Like, I have to sit down and pull out those books that I made about, I have a lot of books in my garage that I got about 15 pages into.
Sure.
And I underlined a lot.
The classics.
No, not classics.
No.
Like deconstruction books, like 10,000 Plateaus by 2 French guys. Like, there was a period where all those semiotext books were coming out, and I was in college, like, I need to understand this stuff.
Yeah.
And I thought that I could, and I could not. And I would underline them. So now I'm going to have to go home with that paper and take some of those books out and try to decode a paper on me.
See, that's the problem with theses. Everybody has already written everything that needs to be written, so they're stuck writing about podcasts.
Well, it had something to do with the medium, and then it had some other I literally could not understand it. And I'm ashamed of that right now because I wish I could tell you something, but I can't even remember the title. It was that convoluted and complicated. There was a statement that he wrote at the beginning of the paper to sort of tell you what the paper was going to be about. I couldn't understand that.
Well, let's talk about what the fuck. And
Okay.
when I found out I was interviewing you about a month ago, I kept every week I'd listen to the new podcast and I'd have all these questions about that last podcast, and I'd have to keep putting those away because there kept being new ones, and not the most recent one, but the second to last most recent one was with Andrew Dice Clay.
Yeah.
He, in some ways, came across exactly as I'd expect him to be. A lot of bravado, a lot of confidence, but on the other hand, completely different than what I thought. He's anti-porn. He's a great father, according to him.
And his son.
That's right. His son said it as well, but he might have been standing over him when he said it.
I don't know. No. The kid came in 2 days later.
Did you know Dice Clay beforehand? Did you have preconceptions about him? Did
Yes.
he surprise you?
Well, he surprised me to a certain degree. I didn't know Dice well. I was a doorman at the Comedy Store in maybe 87. So I was 21 years old, and I used to work the door. And at the time I was working the door, Kennison was just breaking, so he was the big star. And, a lot of people, many of the same people that hate Dice for very similar reasons, hate Sam. But at that time, those were the guys. They were the king of the heap. So Sam was a huge star, and Dice was just about to happen. Now, at that time, I didn't dislike Dice, and I didn't really register him as anything other than this spectacle. Yeah, I mean, he had this jacket and this whole bit of business, and he was, he did nursery rhymes. I wasn't one way or the other on him, but I knew him like that. I never really talked to him other than what I talked about in the podcast, which is I lived in a house that the woman who owned the Comedy Store owned, and he had lived there when he was starting out.
And got blown a lot in the bathtub.
Well, all he said to me was he came up there one night in his jacket, after a show just to look around, and he walked into the room where I was living and goes, "This is my old room. You ever get your dick sucked in the bathtub?" And at that point, I had not. Yeah. And I don't think I ever did, but because there's something about knowing that he got his dick sucked in the bathtub that ruined the whole event. I wasn't breaking any new ground with that bathtub. But that was my interaction with him, and I always found him very intimidating, and in the way that he was not the kind of he felt like the kind of guy that you really didn't want to piss off.
Yeah.
Not because he would hit you, just because he would, hurt you some other way. And I didn't know him that well. All I knew about him was I had a friend. Anyone who hung around with Dice got a nickname. So I used to stay away from him because I didn't want to be that guy. He had a buddy named Hot Tub. His girlfriend was Cheesecake. My buddy who later left the Dice entourage was Jumpstart. And you couldn't get rid of the nickname. So that was sort of my joke. It's like, don't hang around Dice or you're going to end up like, oh, here comes Muffin Head. So...
That's what George W. Bush used to do, too.
Sure. Well, there are certain guys that do that. Kennison did that. There are dudes that need entourages. There's a certain type of ego in comedy and in show business that can't exist on its own without being surrounded by what somebody aptly called satellite comics. Mm-hmm. And he always had a lot of those, and I was always against that. And I ended up not really becoming one, but the Kennison thing with me was weird. But that's all I knew about Dice.
Okay, so then had you spoken to him before the interview?
No. I was afraid of the guy. I never talked to him in my life, other than hey, how you doing, Dice? And then you walk by, and that's it. And he would go, ugh. And, but the opportunity to have him on, the reason I wanted to have him on was that he's got a horrible reputation with people who are sensitive to things that people should be sensitive to. Like Dice did, and I got to be honest with you. In retrospect, after having him on, I don't usually do much research, and I didn't really have any context for him other than I knew he pissed people off. I didn't really remember the exact bits that did it, but when it happened, I remember thinking, really, he's the guy you're going to crucify? The guy in the dumb jacket, the clown? You're going to crucify the clown? And so when I had him on, it was primarily because I had been sitting at the Comedy Store one night. I'd gone in to do a set, and I had this moment where I hadn't had it before. I've spent most of my life, more than half of it, in the back of comedy clubs watching people try to be funny. And one night I'm at the Comedy Store, and I literally, if I closed my eyes, I could not differentiate between the comics that went on. It was the same joke writing style, the same tone, and it was pathetic to me. And then Dice, out of nowhere, comes on, a fatter, less aggressive Dice, no jacket, balding, and he gets on stage for 40 minutes and talks about going to Staples with his kids. And I was hysterical. I was like, holy shit, finally a real comic got on stage.
So he's not doing the nursery rhymes anymore.
No, he doesn't do nursery rhymes. He doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
And so he just talked about going to Staples, but he talked about it like Dice would talk about it. And I think he talked a little bit about it on the podcast.
He did, yeah.
Yeah. But then it turns out he's obsessed with going to Staples. So...
And the paper shredder.
But see, that's the weird thing about Dice. All right, he did a lot of horrible things. He didn't kill anybody. He hurt some feelings and certainly didn't help the cause of a lot of things. But when it comes right down to it, he's a sad old Jewish comedian sitting around a paper shredder getting excited. So...
Well, let me ask you a question. You maybe will take issue with this, but there have been comics such as Dane Cook and famously Gallagher who walked out of your podcast.
Dane didn't walk out.
No, Gallagher did.
Yeah, Doug Gallagher, yeah.
But you gave them a hard time. It wasn't that you weren't on their side all the time, but you were pressing what people were saying negative about them. With Dice, you didn't do that.
Well, it's all been said. I mean, the thing about Dane, and the thing that was curious to me about Dane, it wasn't even the stealing thing. It's just, who the fuck is that guy? And like my whole approach to Dane was like, a lot of people think you're an asshole. Why do you think that is? And then he proceeded to say like, oh, I'm not an asshole, I'm just a guy. And I didn't buy it, and I don't buy it now. But I had to put up with whatever the hell he was selling for an hour. And oddly, because of that podcast, and same with the Gallagher one, is that I'm really just curious. And I don't hate Dane Cook, and I wasn't accusing him as anything. But because I was such a dick, people ended up liking him better. And that was like...
That wasn't your intent.
But it actually is sort of the intent of the show, and it's not something I do on purpose. I got emails from people saying, you asshole, I never liked Dane Cook, and now I do.
You got my message.
Right.
Yeah.
I did.
Actually, I interviewed Dane years ago, and he couldn't have been a sweeter guy.
Yeah, but at the twist of a fucking knob, he could be leading a fascist army.
All right, let's go back a little bit.
Why didn't I give Dice a hard time? Because it's already been done. You know what that guy does. And my engagement with him was essentially that I decided somewhere recently, as I evolve or devolve as a person in what I'm doing on my podcast, which is talking to comedians and allowing them to talk. And there was no way I was going to sit there and grill Andrew Dice Clay without it getting insanely ugly and perhaps having him flip over a table. And I knew that.
And destroying the garage.
Yeah, I don't want to destroy the garage. But also, I have to cop to the fact that I am thoroughly entertained by that guy's disposition. That, like, sitting across from him or Bobby Slayton, I mean, a lot of people think Bobby Slayton's a racist, homophobic asshole, but he's hilarious.
He had a great, Dice Clay had a great quote on your show where he was talking about how he kind of left the scene for a while, and it was because he had to raise his kids, and he says, who gives a fuck about TV or movies if your kids grew up to be morons?
Yeah, in that voice of his. No, I asked him about it. I asked him about how he responded to that, and obviously he has a canned response to a certain degree. But what he said was, it's a character, but I thought, in my belief about the show that I do, is that if you listen to people with the type of ego that he has, and the type of egos that people like Dane has, and certainly the people like Gallagher. The reason I pressed Gallagher is that I never had any. I was one of the few 10-year-olds who had no respect for him. Like, I didn't get it when I was supposed to get it.
But he claims it's satire.
What?
He claims the smashing is satire.
Yeah, that one bit, which he didn't intend to become his career, maybe it was satire at the time he did it, but when he decided to make it everything, it no longer becomes satire, it becomes a sad clown show. So, but that aside, that interview came to me. I didn't pursue Gallagher. The next thing I know, he was coming to me at my hotel, and he was so condescending and so horrendous that I didn't even frame the argument right. And I still think that in that half hour, despite all the email I got from right-wing idiots accusing me of censorship, you found out exactly who that asshole was. And I say that with love because he's a comic. But I couldn't believe he left. And the reason I took him to task was he was not a guy that was known for doing that kind of material. He was a guy who was known for being a buffoon with a hammer. And when all of a sudden you read reports that he's now putting, cans of fruit and water chestnuts, on the table and smashing them, as a symbolic of getting rid of gays and Asian people, that, something should be said. Sure. Because, that's not the fun 10-year-old act that that kids liked. And that was why I approached him. Everyone knows what Dice did, and everyone knows, but not a lot of people know who he is now. And what I was going to say, bringing it back around, was that if you listen to these interviews for an hour, despite what they say, you're going to know who that person is. And the thing about the Dice Clay interview, he's a guy that clearly had a fairly rough time. His dreams did not really happen the way he wanted to. All he can hold on to is this character that he's created. And he admits that sensitivity is his kryptonite. And in no really thinly veiled way, it sounds like he had a bit of a gambling problem. So that's who that guy is. And that's where he is now. If I was going to take him to task for 25 years ago, I'm not running the comedic Nuremberg trials over there. I've gotten emails like that just because of the Carlos Mencia and the Gallagher episode. Now, I get emails like, "Hey, you went a little light on Stiller." I'm like, I didn't know he was a criminal. I'm not talking. I'm not talking to murderers.
Well, do you prefer to interview comedians when there's kind of a hot button issue, or comedians that you've long respected, long loved?
No, I don't. There was the Carlos thing. I actually had that guy into my garage. The initial interview was I didn't understand how somebody could live being that hated by so many people. All I knew about Carlos, because I'm not in the gossip circles, I don't hang around the Comedy Store, I didn't know the scope of the accusations, was I knew that he started around the time I did. He had paid his dues. He had earned his comedic place in the world. We did the HBO Comedy Half Hours in 1995, and the next thing I know, that everyone hates this guy. That's got to be horrendous. And I wanted to talk to him about that. And that's when I thought there were 2 accusations of stealing. So I interview that guy. And then, I felt like he just bullshitted me. for the entire hour. And I'd already announced that I was interviewing him, so people are like, "Where is it?" And I'm like, "I can't put this up. It would be a sham. It would be terrible for me to put this up." So I was in this awkward situation where I'm talking to my friend Al Madrigal. I'm like, "I don't know what the hell to do with this." And he's like, "Well, you got to talk to the Latino guys. This is much bigger than you think." And so now all of a sudden I'm an investigative reporter and I'm calling Latino comics. Some of them are like, "I don't even want to talk about it. I'm good with him." Another guy had become a Christian, so he was out. And but I found a couple of dudes and I got a little more of the accusations together. And then I had to call Carlos back. And he's just self-centered enough to not really, like, I called him really wanting to get closure on the phone. Like, I was going to turn the machine on. I don't do phoners either, just with my dad. And I was hoping, like, I call him up after I talked to Willie Barcena and Steve Trevino. Is that his name? Steve? I forget. Whatever. So Steve Trevino. So I call Carlos up, just hoping that we could do it on the phone. I'm like, "Hey, dude, I got a couple more questions. Got to do a follow up. I found out some more stuff. If you want to just do a phone." He's like, "I just landed at LAX. I'll be over your house in a half hour." So I'm like, "Oh, fuck." So yeah, I never. Can I say that on this?
Sure. Yeah.
So
Please.
but I never had that feeling where I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know this guy. I don't know who he runs with. I don't know if he's going to come over and there's going to be problems. I really felt physically like something might go down. But he is his desire to be liked and respected is so deep that he would never do that. So he just came over thinking like, all right, we'll just finish this up. And then when I kept on him, like just the way he unraveled without really saying, I stole anything, you listen to that. And again, I'm getting emails like, I still think that guy's a fucking asshole, but I feel bad for him. So that's what happens.
You could make a career out of that, making people who were really hated could come on your show and you could make them feel a little bit more loved by being mean to them.
I think I'm doing that.
Like people, people could pay you for the service.
Well, that'd be great. Yeah, like I got a criminal. I'd be on like the mob's publicist list.
That's right.
Listen, this guy killed 6 people, but he's out and he's a good guy. What do you say? An hour with him in the garage?
Think about it. If you run out of comics.
Yeah. Well, if he's got good stories, we'll try it. It's not my agenda to do that. It was never my agenda to court controversy either. I don't really like that kind of radio. But the most difficult questions I really have to ask was talking to Robin Williams about joke theft accusations. I mean, what really drove me to the Robin Williams interview was the fact that 22-year-old comics were calling him a hack and a thief and dismissing him.
Because he'll go around whenever he's in any city, he'll go up and perform, and then he'll listen to the other comics, and the word was that he was taking stuff.
But that wasn't even the problem. I wouldn't have. I don't know if I would have talked to him, other than the fact where it's like, how do you dismiss a guy that started exactly the same way you did, in exactly the same situation, as a young comic from San Francisco, went to Los Angeles, got cast on a TV show about 7 or 6 years into his stand-up career, and then sustained a comedic career and a film career for 30 years. Where do you get off being 22 years old saying, "No, fuck that guy"?
Yeah.
No, fuck you. I mean, even if you don't like Robin Williams or you don't like what he does or you never liked what he did ever, for you to say at that age, like, he's a thief, you don't know anything about that dude, and he did exactly what you want to do. So that was what drove me. I got sick of hearing young comics dismiss him. And I wasn't necessarily like, Robin's a genius or anything else. I just couldn't understand the arrogance of it.
So how did he respond?
Well, I didn't say that to him. That's why I did the interview.
No, but how did he respond to accusations that he lifts?
Well, he was known for, he actually wrote people checks. And I saw how it happens. There's guys around like this that do this today. Carlos, I think, is pathological. There's something wrong with him. And it's deeper than can be explained. But Robin has like an extremely active mind. And I think what happens with him, and I saw it happen because I saw it happen to me. He didn't steal something, but I saw how it could happen. He would sit around, and because his brain's going and he's sitting in comedy shows, that when he hears something funny, his brain says, "That's funny." And then 3 days later, his brain says, "Did I think of that?" And then a week later, he's added things to it, and it's his bit. he doesn't have the filter to sort of know after a certain point whether or not he heard it or whether or not
It's like he's sampling.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't really think it's on purpose. I don't think he sits there and goes, "Ooh, that's a good one. I'm going to take that." Yeah, I don't think he does that because he came up to me after a show. He came to see me at the Throckmorton Theater, which is up in Marin County, and they hang out there. Mort Saul hangs out there, to sit around and talk about how he invented everything. And
does he still carry around the newspaper?
I don't know, dude, but it's rare that I have resentment towards an old guy, but I've got resentment towards that old guy.
Why?
Because I want to have him on the show.
Didn't he pave the way?
For what?
For Lenny Bruce,
No, he did not pave the way for Lenny Bruce. There are two schools, buddy. You got Lenny Bruce over here, and you got Mort Saul over here. Over here, you have this amazing, erratic, crass genius who can do anything. Over here, you got a guy who reads a paper and tells premises that he masks his jokes. Anyways, it's history. Sorry, old people. I have tried to listen to Mort Saul as a student of comedy, and when I do, every joke he does, I go, "Where's the rest of it?" So, but on top of that, he's arrogant to me. I'm like, I'd love to talk to you because I'd like to. I respect him to a degree in terms of what he did do, and I'm certainly willing to forego my own personal opinions because I didn't live through that history. But I have a personality that rubs the wrong way with him. He sees me.
Is it because you say you hate him?
That might be it. I just don't know why he doesn't want to do my show. It's personal. Because I've interviewed him before, but he's one of those guys that he just talks out. He doesn't engage in conversation. But Robin, when I was doing the Throckmorton, he came up to me after the show, and I'd done this bit I've done for years, this demon bit. And he came up to me after the show, and he was excited, childlike excitement. He's like, "Ooh, that demon joke you do is really good, and you could go here and here and here." And I'm like, "Oh, that's how it happens." He had added all this stuff to my joke, and I realized that that's 3 days away from him not remembering whether or not he heard it through me or whether he just came up with it. I think that since he's sober and stuff, he doesn't really do that anymore, and he completely copped to it. He completely, admitted to having done that and was very humble about it. It was a pretty amazing moment.
Well, before you go, because I know you got to run, you just gave a heartfelt speech at Just for Laughs, the keynote address.
Yeah.
And one of the things you said was that the podcast, in many ways, has saved your life.
Yeah.
So in 30 seconds, what do you mean?
When I started the podcast, I was finished. I was washed up, really. I mean, I couldn't get an agent. I couldn't get work. I had a manager that was no longer working for me, and I just had no idea what the hell I was going to do. I really didn't. I'd just been through a bad divorce, and me and my partner, started basically breaking into the Air America studios because they didn't take our security cards away, and we started doing this thing. And
they don't have the equipment to turn that off? Usually when you leave a job...
Look, if they knew what the fuck they were doing, they'd still be on the air. So there were a lot of problems. My security card wasn't at the top of their list. They were still trying to figure out why and how they hired Montel Williams. He
once gave a speech at, I think, my wife's high school, a motivational speech.
Sure.
And
that must be the reason
his refrain was, "Mountain, out of my way," which I think is a great refrain.
It's a unique liberal position. It's so weird because you'd think that the victory would be in climbing the mountain, as opposed to trying to get it to move itself. I guess that's the genius of Montel.
So part of the show, I guess, is you working through your shit. Is that what's...
Look, all I knew is I had to reach out to my friends, and I had to, integrate myself back into the comedic community. And because of that, because this is my community, and I feel very close to all these guys, even guys that I've shit on, or even guys that I've taken to task, or comics are a weird bunch of emotional gypsies and social retards, and I can use that word. We're grown-ups. they're a unique bunch, and they've been my life, for half of my life. So when they all started coming around and this show started to grow, I found that I was, learning how to laugh again at comedy. And, when you're in comedy 25 years, your ability to laugh at anything appropriately becomes completely wrong. I mean, you only laugh when people are failing. And it's not even a real laugh. I don't know if you've been to a comedy club, but if you see a comic on stage and there's only 12 people in the club, and in the back of the room you hear something that sounds like, ah. It's like you get to a point in comedy where your laugh is just like a punctuation. It's not even, doesn't come from an emotional place. It's just this sort of like, ah. Or else
like
this one.
I recognize that as a joke.
Well, no, yeah, kind of, but it usually comes when the audience completely turns on the comic, and all you hear is that.
So that's sweet. That's nice, though. That's
yeah,
being
it's
supportive.
nice, but it's like it's being cheered to ruin it more. But no, it's just like by talking to these people, I learned how to be empathetic for the first time in my life. A little less self-centered. I learned how to be an active listener. I learned how to enjoy talking to, because that's the kind of kid I was. I was a kid that would hang around. Like my grandfather had a hardware store when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and there were all these characters that would hang around, and I just like standing around listening to people that seemed to have a life tell me about it. I've always been that guy. When I worked at a restaurant in high school that was by the college, and I would be the guy that would bring homeless people who talk to themselves into the restaurant and give them coffee so I could listen to them ramble. Like, it's just the kind of person I am. Yeah. And I think secretly I envied their ability to ramble. Like, there's some part of me that feels like my life is incomplete, or I'm an incomplete person. So when I talk to people that have very defined personalities, I immediately get a very codependent sort of engagement with them. That comes from having a father who is bipolar. And so like I am so prone to engaging with mania that like manic people are relieved when I'm there. I don't know if you know what that feels like, to be the guy if there's a crazy person walking down the street, talking to himself, walking past everybody, and everybody that they're walking past going, whoa, I'm the guy that they'll go, hey. Because I am wired to receive that. So that sort of engages me, and most comics are interesting, kind of crazy people. And it made me, it seems to have enabled me to arrive at myself, after a long 45-year search.
Well, the show is great. I could talk to you forever, but I know you got to go. So thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. Marc Maron, everyone.